Hello everyone, this is Priyanka. In continuation with last week's introductory video that I had made on the nature of human consciousness, I wanted to explore further on the same topic, which is what is consciousness. And I just wanted to give a brief outline on the areas of consciousness that I think might be relevant for this short video today, such as what is consciousness, what does it mean to be conscious, and what role does consciousness play in our day-to-day life? How does our consciousness influence us in our relationships within our own families as well as with the world outside? And finally, what does it actually mean to be a conscious entity? So these are the rough outline I wanted to give up front so that anybody watching this video will have an idea as to what are the topics that we're going to be discussing in this video today. So what is consciousness? Why do we, when we talk about consciousness, what is the first thing that comes to our mind? One would think typically by consciousness, we would think of a state of being awake, a state of being aware of ourselves, the position of our bodies in space, our immediate surroundings. The first thing that will come to mind is all the things that we are physically aware of or conscious of. That's what we mean when we say, what is one conscious of? To be conscious of implies that there is certain things that one is in a wakeful state of awareness of. So, but we are not talking about purely physical. As I had mentioned in my introductory video, which was taken last week or the week before, that my interest is primarily in investigating into the deeper realms, into the deeper aspects of consciousness, the human nature, the human mind, the human psyche. How does that work? And by such exploration, if a fundamental transformation was perhaps possible, that was the whole idea behind wanting to make this series of videos. And so keeping in context with that, so when we say consciousness, what's the first thing that comes to our minds? Not from a physical perspective or from a science perspective or from a medical perspective, but really we are talking about a psychological perspective. So when we say a psychological perspective, I also want to make it abundantly clear, like I did in my first video, that I make no reference to any scriptural associations or definitions of the term consciousness or of anything that I would be discussing on any topics. This is purely a deep, logical, analytical investigation that I am making on my own. And I hope you'd be able to explore this along with me and find perhaps many revelations for yourself in that inquiry. So when we talk of consciousness, typically we would think of all the things. I mean, for me, when I say I'm conscious of something, there needs to be something that I must be aware of. So in the absence of something that is there to be aware of, to speak of consciousness has no meaning really, right? You have to have something that you're aware of, that you're conscious of. So in that sense, consciousness has to be its contents. So I'm not just speaking of consciousness from a perspective of being awake or in a state of alertness, but I'm speaking of consciousness from a perspective of something around, something about which one is aware of or alert about or conscious of. So in that sense, what is consciousness? What is it actually made up of? What is the stuff that we're talking about? So many things have been written about it, but simply for a layman, what does it mean when we talk about consciousness? What are the things that I am aware of, that I am conscious of? What is my consciousness made up of? What is your consciousness made up of? This is perhaps the most relevant thing that one can possibly investigate into, to speak of something that has no immediate relationship, to speak of consciousness from a higher realm or higher field or higher dimension has no point of connection with my day-to-day life, has no applicability to my day-to-day life. So I have to start with me first. Without this understanding, to possibly hope to fathom something else that's beyond this doesn't make much sense. It's not something that I can relate to. So therefore, one has to start from oneself. One has to first explore within oneself what their life is all about, what is the quality of their minds, what is the quality of their consciousness, and what is consciousness. So let's first explore that. That's the basic question. What is consciousness? And what is it that one is aware of? What is it that you are aware of every day? What is your consciousness made up of? Your consciousness, what are all the things that you're aware of? I mean, whether it's physical or anything else, you are aware of all your experiences. You are conscious of everything that's happened today in your life from the time that you woke up till now. You are conscious likewise of everything else that preceded today in your life, for as far back as you can remember. So those are all your memories. So your memories, you're conscious of your memories, especially those memories that have made a deep groove in your mind. And those are the things that will typically get stored in your brain cells as memories. Anything that's made a lasting impact, a lasting mark, anything that's left a mark is likely to get stayed, it's likely to stay back with you, and therefore it remains as memory, and therefore you are conscious of those memories, however far back it might have happened or however recent it may have happened. So you are aware of these things. You are also aware of your preferences, right? You know the things that you like, you know the things that you don't like. You have a certain preference for certain things and not much of a preference for certain other things, and you are aware of it because these are your preferences, therefore you are conscious of them. Your likes and dislikes, which is the same as preferences. You're also aware of your experiences from the past, whether they are pleasant experiences, painful experiences, but let's just call them memories. Let's just call experiences as memories, because anything that's happened in an experience, if it has stayed with you, it means that it's left a mark on you. If it's sufficiently pleasant or sufficiently unpleasant, it certainly has it's made a groove in your brain cells, and therefore it is stored in your memory as in your brain cells as memories, and therefore you are conscious of all your experiences as well. And likewise, when I say experiences, that is sufficient to sum up the whole range of things that could have happened that might have stayed in your mind. So everything that is a sum total of your life that's preceded this moment that you are sitting here in front of your video watching this, everything that's preceded, everything that has stayed with you, everything that you've learned by way of knowledge, in a way memories are also part of your knowledge. Why? Because it's out of these memories that you can any actions will come out of you in future. You learn from experience how to respond to a certain stimuli in future. You learn through trial and experience. You learn through trial and error. And all these happen by way of experiences. But there's a vast part of this experience that has settled in your mind, which may or may not be relevant for your day-to-day practical living, which is not needed, but yet it's left a mark and therefore it has stayed with you. But all this forms part of the knowledge that is stored in your brain or in your mind. And you are aware of all of these things. So fundamentally, if you were to break it down, all of these experiences that you might have had, all of these from every, what does it mean when we talk about experience? Why, when we say experience, I mean, obviously everything that's happened is a form of an experience in some way or the other. But when we say experience, there is something to be experienced out of that, right? And what is that? What is that juice that one gets out of a particular activity or a particular interaction or a particular endeavor? What is it that one gets out of it? What is the juice that one derives out of it? So for me, if I were to do something that I enjoy doing, it gives me great pleasure. So what I derive out of that experience of doing, that experience that is derived from that is not so much in the activity as in the feeling that that is drawn from it. from that activity. So that is the experience. The experience is not just chewing the food. Of course, that is also a sort of physical experience. But the mental experience is really enjoying a taste, or disliking a particular taste of a food that you may not like. So the experience really lies in the psychological aspect of it, more than the physical aspect of doing something. Nobody does anything just for the sake of chewing food. I'm not going to sit every day in front of, I'm really going to do it because I enjoy eating something, a particular favorite dish of mine. I'm not going to take the trouble to swim if there was no fun in it, if I didn't enjoy it. Or I'm not going to bother with, any activity for that matter. There is the driving force behind it is not the physicality of it itself. The driving force behind it is rather a psychological aspect of it, which is this experience, this juice that you derive out of it. And if you think about it, fundamentally, it's the same juice, it's the same experience, whether it's for you or for me. The drive could be different for you and the drive could be different for me. But what we both derive out of it, out of doing something that we both like, is that same pleasure. It's the same pleasure principle that works for you and works for me. So, and that, as I mentioned in my intro video a couple of weeks ago, that is the common factor that connects you and me. And that is part of my consciousness, therefore it's also part of your consciousness. So, if you look at it that way, we have a lot more in common with each other than meets the eye. We might think that this is my experience and this is my life and this is my consciousness and so on. But really think about it. Your experiences, the individual instances might have been different. But what have you gotten out of each of those experiences, and what have I gotten out of each of my experiences? Fundamentally, they are just so alike. Fundamentally, they are same. In that sense, fundamentally, your consciousness and my consciousness is also the same. One might be born into poverty, one might be born into riches, it doesn't matter. But a person who's poor also has experienced what joy and happiness is. Likewise, a person who's rich and wealthy has also experienced what sorrow and grief is. So the residual juice that we draw out of each of these activities or each of these actions in life is essentially the same. And this is what basically forms my consciousness, forms your consciousness. So to speak meaningfully of consciousness in a divisive way, as though it's somewhat different for you and as though it's somewhat different for me, in a deeper sense, really has no meaning. At a superficial level, yes, you can say, your life is slightly different from my life because we come from totally two different cultures and totally two different traditions, totally two different educational background and socioeconomic status and so on and what have you. But really, if you scratch the surface, and so what is this consciousness made up of? Predominantly these things, right? You might have become a surgeon and I might have become a barrister. You might have become a teacher and I might have become a proprietor of a business. It doesn't matter. But basically, why do we do it? You do it because you enjoy doing it. You do it because you want to make money, and that's my same reasons as well why I do it. You might say, no, I'm doing it because I want to be a social worker and I want to help the world and whatever. But what do you get out of it? You get this feeling of satisfaction. And I get this feeling of satisfaction from what I do. I may not be doing it for social reform. I may not be doing what I do for from a perspective of anything, in the interest of another, but perhaps in my own self-interest. But ultimately, whether you do it in the interest of somebody else or whether you do it in your own interest, there is that fulfillment that we both derive out of that experience, out of that activity, out of that endeavor. So that is the driving force behind our actions, that primal driver, that pushes you and pulls you in different directions, is basically these residual emotions of pleasure, sorrow, grief, pain, regrets, anger, hatred, fulfillment, satisfaction, and so on and so forth. But this is the driver behind all our actions in life. Everything that we do stems out of these. Without these, there is no incentive to move forward. There's no incentive to get out of bed, or just about engage in any activity. If there was none of these drivers, I have to make it very clear, I'm speaking purely from the perspective of a layman's life. I am not speaking from the perspective of any higher definitions or some elevated meanings or scriptural definitions of consciousness. I'm purely exploring myself, and by the self I mean everything that I attribute to the self called the me, the I, you. And when I say I and you, again, like I said previously, I'm only using these personal pronouns such as you and I for ease of language, for ease of reference and relatability, and not for any other reason. So the residual drive behind all our actions in life seems to me to be basically these things, which is a common connector, which is the only common thread that we have between you and me, and this common thread is this stream of consciousness that is common for you as well as for me. So when we talk of consciousness now, when you look at it from this angle, what does it even mean any longer? All this while I thought, oh, this is my life. I know of this, I know of that, I've read this book, I've read that book, I've accomplished this and that, and so on and so forth. But what does it all boil down to really? The individual instances might have been different, but what have you derived by doing all the activities that you have done in your past? What is it that you took out of all of them? You could have taken out of a whole lot of knowledge out of a textbook or some great encyclopedia, but what drove you to doing it in the first place? Would have been pretty much the same thing that would have driven somebody else doing a bungee jumping somewhere. So, you see, that's the common drive. What is it that drives you, pushes you into action is the same thing that drives me and pushes me into action. So what differentiates you from me really? Is it just the physical body, or is it just what is different about you and me? In what way are we really different? Are we really so uniquely different as humans? So there is this common stream of consciousness that's flowing between you and me, and yet we've made so many divisions, it seems, amongst so many divisions, and that division also seems to be part of this human thinking. It runs in the stream of human thought. So I wonder if the sum total of me, all of one's contents, is basically essentially made up of one's past. I say past deliberately because everything that you've known, whether it's book knowledge or personal experiential knowledge or whatever it is, scriptural knowledge or whatever it is, all this is part of your past, right? And that is what you can be conscious of. To speak meaningfully of consciousness, you can only be conscious of that which you know, that which is within your mind's vicinity. So anything beyond this, you can't meaningfully speak of to be conscious of. So I am only referring to all the things that put together this entity that I am. This entity that I am, the sum total of me, is basically the content of my consciousness. So I wonder what would happen if this awareness of all that was in my past were to just erase off, or let's say if there is nothing to be aware of inwardly, what would the state of consciousness be? Sure, one could still be conscious of, from a physical perspective, one still has sensations in the body because you have nerves running up and down your body, so you have a well-connected nervous system, so you are bound to feel sensations in the body, and that can give you a feeling of being here, like physically present. You know the location of your body in space, so you have that awareness of where you are. So to some extent you can be aware of everything that's physical, the movement of your limbs, the movement of your body, the table and the chair around you, or your house, or the people moving about in front of you, and so on. But inwardly, if there was, I'm not being speculative, and I'm certainly not speaking of something that's possible or not possible. I don't want to conclude. I simply just want to explore. And in the spirit of pure investigation, if one were to scratch further, so what happens? Suppose there's nothing to be aware of inwardly. What is the state of such a mind? What is the state of such a consciousness? And what will consciousness mean then? More importantly, what will happen to me then? The me, the I. What happens to that? The sum total of me is the content of my consciousness. Now, in the absence of that content of consciousness, am I still there? And I also mentioned that this consciousness, this underlying stream, this consciousness is the common thread, it's the common connector, it's the common denominator that connects all humanity, all humanity, all sentient beings in a way, but let's stick to just human beings for that matter, for now, for the sake of this inquiry. What happens? What first of all happened? Leave alone nothing to be aware of. But having established that this is a common denominator between you and me, what does consciousness mean? An individual consciousness mean now? Does it hold any water any longer? Or is it something else entirely different from what we thought it was, as we knew consciousness to be? You see, the common denominator that connects you and me, the residual that you take from your experiences and I take from my experiences, are fundamentally the same. There's really no difference between the driving force behind all your actions in life and the driving force behind all my actions in life. So I wonder then, what do we mean actually by an individual? That's number one. Number two, should there be nothing to be aware of? Let's just say brain has just not registered much by way of anything that's happened. Suppose that were to be a plausibility, what then? What happens to this consciousness, individual or otherwise? What meaning does it have, this I? So I will end this video with this today, and I will leave this thought with you, and I hope to come up in continuation with this exploration with another video next week, which I hope you will find equally interesting and food for thought. Thank you.